Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Without further ado, returning to The Picture of Dorian Gray, as read by Lord Naren White. Cloudless and pierced by one solitary star, a copper-green sky gleamed through the windows. He read on by its wan light till he could read no more. Then, after his valet had reminded him several times of the lateness of the hour, he got up and, going into the next room, placed the book on the little Florentine table that always stood at his bedside, and began to dress for dinner. It was almost 9 o'clock before he reached the club, where he found Lord Henry sitting alone in the morning room, looking very bored. "I am so sorry, Harry," he cried, "but really it is entirely your fault. That book you sent me so fascinated me that I forgot what the time was." "I thought you would like it," replied his host, rising from his chair. "I didn't say I liked it, Harry. I said it fascinated me. There is a great difference." "Ah, if you have discovered that, you have discovered a great deal," murmured Lord Henry. Murmured Lord Henry, with his curious smile. "Come, let us go in to dinner. It is dreadfully late, and I am afraid the champagne will be too much iced." Chapter 9. For years, Dorian Gray could not free himself from the memory of this book, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he never sought to free himself from it. He procured from Paris no less than 5 large paper copies of the first edition, and had them bound in different colors so that they might suit his various moods and the changing fancies of a nature over which he seemed at times to have almost entirely lost control. The hero, the wonderful young Parisian, in whom the romantic temperament and the scientific temperament were so strangely blended, became to him a kind of prefiguring type of himself. And indeed, the whole book seemed to him to contain the story of his own life, written before he had lived it. In one point, he was more fortunate than the book's fantastic hero. He never, indeed, had any cause to know that somewhat grotesque dread of mirrors and polished metal surfaces and still water, which came upon the young Parisian so early in his life, and was occasioned by the sudden decay of a beauty that had once apparently been so remarkable. It was with an almost cruel joy, and perhaps in nearly every joy, as certainly in every pleasure cruelty has its place, that he used to read the latter part of the book with its really tragic, if somewhat overemphasized, account of the sorrow and despair of one who had himself lost what in others in the world, and who account of the sorrow and despair of one who had himself lost what in others and in the world he had most valued. He had at any rate had no cause to fear that the boyish beauty that had so fascinated Basil Hallward and many others besides him seemed never to leave him. Even those who had heard the most evil things against him, and from time to time strange rumors about his mode of life, crept through London and became the chatter of the clubs. Could not believe anything to his dishonor when they saw him. He had always the look of one who had kept himself unspotted from the world. Men who talked grossly became silent when Dorian Gray entered the room. There was something in the purity of his face that rebuked them. His mere presence seemed to recall to them the innocence that they had tarnished. They wondered how one so charming and graceful as he was could have escaped the stain of an age that was once sordid and sensuous. He himself, on returning home from one of those mysterious and prolonged absences that gave rise to such strange conjecture among those who were his friends, or thought that they were so, would creep upstairs to the locked room, open the door with the key that never left him, and stand with the mirror in front of the portrait that Basil Hallward had painted of him, looking now at the evil and aging face on the canvas, and now at the fair young face that laughed back at him from the polished glass. The very sharpness of the contrast used to quicken his sense of pleasure. He grew more and more enamored of his own beauty, more and more interested in the corruption of his own soul. He would examine with minute care, and often with a monstrous and terrible delight, the hideous lines that sealed the wrinkling forehead or crawled around the heavy sensual mouth, wandering signs sometimes which were the more horrible, the signs of sin or the signs of age. He would place his white hands beside the coarse bloated hands of the picture and smile. He mocked the misshapen body and the failing limbs. There were moments, indeed, at night, when, lying sleepless in his own delicately scented chamber, or in the sordid room of the little ill famed tavern near the docks, which, under an assumed name and in disguise, it was habit to frequent, he would think of the ruin he had brought upon his soul with a pity that was all the more poignant because it was purely selfish. But moments such as these were rare. That curiosity about life that many years before Lord Henry had first stirred in him, as they sat together in the garden of their friend, seemed to increase with gratification. The more he knew, the more he desired to know. He had mad hungers that grew more ravenous as he fed them. Yet he was not really reckless, at any rate in his relations to society. Once or twice every month during the winter, and on each Wednesday evening while the season lasted, he would throw open to the world his beautiful house and have the most celebrated musicians of the day to charm his guests with the wonders of their art. His little dinners, in the settling of which Lord Henry always assisted him, were noted as much for the careful selection and placing of those invited as for the exquisite taste shown in the decoration of the table with its subtle symphonic arrangements of exotic flowers and embroidered cloths and antique plate of gold and silver. Indeed, there were many, especially among the very young men, who saw or fancied that they saw in Dorian Gray the true realization of a type of which they had often dreamed in Eton or Oxford days. A type that was to combine something of the real culture of the scholar with all the grace and distinction and perfect manner of a citizen of the world. To them he seemed to belong to those whom Dante describes as having sought, make themselves perfect by the worship of beauty. Like Gautier, he was one for whom the visible world existed. And certainly, to him, life itself was the first, the greatest of the arts, and for it all the other arts seem to be but a preparation, fashion by which what is really fantastic becomes a moment universal, and dandyism, which in its own way is an attempt to assert the absolute modernity of beauty, had of course their fascination for him. His mode of dressing and the particular styles that he affected from time to time had their marked influence on the young exquisites of the Mayfair balls and Pall Mall club windows who copied him in everything that he did, and tried to reproduce the accidental charm of his graceful, though to him only half serious fopperies. For, while he was but too ready to accept the position that was almost immediately offered him on his coming of age, and found, indeed, a subtle pleasure in the thought, he might really become to the London of his own day what to Imperial Neronian Rome the the author of the Satyricon had once been, yet in his inmost heart he desired to be something more than a mere arbiter elegantarium, to be consulted on the wearing of a jewel, or the knotting of a necktie, or the conduct of a cane. He sought to elaborate some new scheme of life that would have its reasoned philosophy and its ordered principles, and find in the spiritualizing of the senses its highest realization. The worship of the senses has often, and with much justice, been decreed, men feeling a natural instinct of terror about passions and sensations that seem stronger than ourselves, that we are conscious of sharing with the less highly organized forms of existence. But it appeared to Dorian Gray that the true nature of the senses had never been understood, and that they had remained savage and animal merely because the world had sought to starve them into submission or to kill them by pain, instead of aiming at making them elements of a new spirituality, of which a fine instinct for beauty was to be the dominant characteristic. As he looked back upon a man moving through history, he was haunted by a feeling of loss. So much had been surrendered, and to such little purpose. There had been mad, wilful rejections, monstrous forms of self-torture and self-denial, whose origin was fear, and whose result was a degradation infinitely more terrible than that fancied degradation from which in their ignorance they had sought to escape. Nature, in her wonderful irony, driving the anchorite out to herd with the wild animals of the desert, and giving to the hermit the beasts of the field as his companions. Yes, there was to be, as Lord Henry had prophesied, a new hedonism that was to recreate life and to save it from that harsh, uncomely Puritanism that is having, in our own day, its curious revival. It was to have its service of the intellect, certainly, yet it was never to accept any theory or system that would involve the sacrifice of any mode of passionate experience. Its aim, indeed, was to be experience itself, and not the fruits of experience, or sweet as or bitter as they may be, of the asceticism that deadens the senses, as of the vulgar profligacy that dulls them. It was to know nothing, but it was to teach man to concentrate himself upon the moments of a life that is itself but a moment. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.